We are streaming.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. If you're tuning in for the latest soccer match from Wembley Stadium, I have news for you. Your team lost, and you're on the wrong channel. So, I hope you didn't have too much wager on that game. Before we start, does anyone have any questions? Resounding silence. Okay. I'll see if I can't provoke some questions as we go through.
Announcements or?
Announcements. Do you have a list?
Not really. I have my enchilada dinner.
Okay. First announcement, for those of you in the Greater Reading area, there will be a very, very delicious, it's an enchilada dinner for Cinco de Mayo. It is held over at the Masonic Lodge, sponsored by the Order of the Eastern Star, Saturday, May 5th, which is the 5th of May, and that is why it's called Cinco de Mayo. Because Mayo means May, and Cinco means 5. And that is a celebration of Mexico celebrating their independence from?
United States.
It's actually a minor war they lost.
But
they won that battle.
They won that battle against?
California.
Who?
The Russians.
Let's say that's 2 strikes. Any other guesses?
She said the Russians.
That's 3 strikes.
All right, we're
Who settled Mexico primarily? Spain. So was this independence from Spain?
It had something to do with that, maybe. Round 3.
How about France? The French controlled Mexico at one time, and this was a victory against the French from our Mexican neighbors south of the border. They did very well.
Hey, Karen.
Hello. We just barely got started. You haven't missed hardly anything.
We're having too much fun.
And so that's the first announcement. These are $12 per person. It goes to a good cause, some kind of fund at the Order of the Eastern Star. So if you like Mexican food and you want to celebrate Cinco de Mayo, without getting rip-roaringly drunk, but good food, then this is the place to go.
Okay, can I say something about it?
Yeah.
It's $12, and the Order of the Eastern Star and the Masons always put on a really good spread, so it's probably going to be a lot of food. And you can eat there at the lodge, or you can pick it up and go. So it's another way of doing it. So I've got some tickets here if anybody's interested in that. Just before we go any further, I hit streaming, but I don't see that it's doing anything on the other page, and I don't see the chat. Do you want to look at that really quick before we go any further?
Yes. Sorry about this. But, can you move that?
Watch my drink.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's going.
So I didn't know if we needed to refresh or something, or how all that works.
Usually not. Oh, it says it's live now.
I don't recognize
Okay, apparently we needed to refresh. And this is the chat
Okay.
for you to say something and whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I've never
And we're
seen
not
it.
seeing anybody else online right
Not-
now. Okay.
Well, not yet.
Okay.
So, minor technical difficulties today. Next announcement is about the 28th of April.
Okay.
So, did you want to talk, or would you like me to?
Well, you all should know about it. I don't know if you know, Karen, that we're doing a level 2 and a level 3, and then a special invocational dinner, and you're all invited. Anyone online who has the Akadwa or would like us would like to come, just contact us. But if I think other than Yvonne, everybody is a level 3. You're a level 3, right?
Level 2.
Level 2. Okay.
No,
So. Anyway, we'll let you guys argue about that on the side there.
Yeah.
How come I thought it was a level 2?
We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Uh,
The point is that you're welcome to sit in on the classes that you've already attended, and if you're interested in coming to the level 3 class, there will be some advanced techniques that will be presented, and so it's worth sitting in on that a second time if you're interested, and that
So-
includes the dinner as well.
So let me say just one word about the dinner. Good. The other words I want to say is the level 3 class, we have 3 people who will be getting their level 3 that day. And any of the rest of you who come, I'm going to be teaching some advanced techniques, I think 2 main ones, that are really important for your continued advancement on your spiritual path. So I encourage you, it's a really minuscule fee if you already have your level 3 to do that. The invocational dinner, I don't know that any of you have ever seen anything quite like it. This is a shamanic art form I was taught by Coyote some years ago, and it involves creating a sacred space and serving a very specifically planned and intentionally prepared meal. There is an overall intent for this meal, and I invoke various forces that help transform the food. So just by participating, you receive another bump in your transformation. So I encourage you to attend. The morning is a level 2 class. You must be a level 1 to attend that. The afternoon is a level 3. You must be a level 2 or 3 to attend that. You can be a level 4 if you want, but then I would wonder why. So Bonnie, I would know because she'd be helping me teach. So that's coming up on the 28th. We're going to have a short broadcast today because after we turn off the broadcast, those of you who are here and one person who we will have on the phone, we're going to be talking about the next steps of this school to you, the core group. So please stay for that. And that's all I will say at this time. We've been talking about Toltec history, correct?
Yes.
So what I want to talk about tonight is exactly what we mean when we say Toltec. You've heard me talk about the history. It was these Mesoamericans. They did all this cool stuff. But when you start training in the Toltec spiritual path, and you start to identify yourself as being a Toltec, what exactly do we mean? So we know a lot about what Toltecs think we mean, because we have this oral tradition. It goes back many thousands of years. I was trained by Coyote the Blind, he was trained by Cachora, he was trained by his father and mother Cachora, and on and on and on. And it can be traced back all the way to Sayacatl and beyond. But what does that mean exactly? And is the oral tradition that has been passed on correct? And how would we know? And how do we know all of this stuff about the Toltecs? So there's a lot that we can actually verify from history. Now, I am using history, the word history, differently than the academics do. Academia has deemed history is anything that was written down in a written language that they could decipher. So when you go to a college, university kind of situation, and you talk to historians, they look at written documents only. You want something carved in stone? Well, guess what? You have to go down the hall to the archaeology department, and those two departments don't talk. And if you want to look at the spoken languages, well, then you go down to the linguistics department, and they don't talk with either of the other two departments. And the anthropologists and the sociologists and the DNA people and the mythology people, none of them talk to each other. And this is one of the great limitations of modern academia, is the lack of ability, willingness, or whatever you want to call the reasons why, they just don't compare notes. And when they do, those few individuals who've been very successful at that, you find amazing things. So if we have an oral tradition of the Toltecs that we claim goes back eons, then can we verify any of that oral tradition through history, linguistics, archaeology, geology? If we say, oh, there was a lake here at a certain time and place, can we verify that in the geological record or through biology in some way? And on down the list. If we say that certain groups of people were all related through philosophy and language, can we verify that in any way? And so the research that Bonnie and I have been working on this year has to do with trying to verify a lot of our oral traditions. And as you heard me allude in earlier broadcasts, the experts, even the experts in archaeology, don't agree with each other. And so there's a huge amount of stuff that we claim was Toltecs, but they're only looking at this little window over here. They're going to look at this little box of maybe 900 to 1150 AD, and that's the only box they're looking at. And they say, oh, there was this huge civilization at Teotihuacan, but we don't know who lived there. We'll call them the Teotihuacanos. And oh, there was this other huge population over at the city that's now called Tula, and we don't know who they were, but we'll call them Tulans, or Tulanites. I can't remember which word they used. And we don't know why, but everything at Tula looks an awful lot like stuff way over here in Maya land at Chichen Itza, and we don't know why, so we're going to pretend that doesn't exist. And those are just a few of the major glaring inconsistencies that academia produces. And I think last time I talked a lot about what the word Toltec means. In the ancient writings, what we now call the city of Tula was referred to as the city of Tolan. It means the place of the reeds. And
Reeds?
so, reeds, R-E-E-D, meaning the rushes, aka cattails, in modern parlance. So, the name Tula, of course, came to mean any city where they had cattails. So any city by a lake could have cattails, any city by a river. And so we see that the name Tula got moved around, and that confuses everybody. We see the name Toltec got moved around, which confuses everybody. There is, of course, another meaning that is not discussed in academia, because now that we start to branch into the metaphysical, the name Sayacatl, and this is the clue, the name Sayacatl, the last king of the Toltecs, that name is translated as one reed. Does that mean he was a kid who only got one cattail in his bouquet when he went to grade school that year? No. It's referring to the energy of the spinal column, the energy channels. So in Chinese medical parlance, this would refer to the governing vessel meridian that runs up the back, but it's really more that central tube, which in
Sushumna.
the Ida, the Pingala, and the Sushumna, which give us the symbol for the medical caduceus. right? That's what that refers to. You talk to any medical doctor and tell them their symbol is ancient mythological symbol for the esoteric world of energy medicine, and they would run away screaming. They would probably renounce their medical career. They wouldn't want anything to do with that. That'd be fun to try. I think I'll try that the next time I talk to the medical doctor who's down on energy medicine. Well, why do you have a caduceus on your office door then? So one reed means one shushumna, one energy tube, one person's energy field. So now we're into the world of energy bodies. And when you talk about the city, yeah, it's hailing again, of the rushes, the city of the reeds, it could mean that there was a pool of water there. It could mean there were people there who were energetically activated and knew what they were doing with that energy, and so there were many reeds there. So hence Tolan, the city where the energy people hung out. That's another possibility. But the key is, when we have been looking, we find, okay, there's 5 theories for what does Toltec mean. And, actually there's more like between 8 and 10 when you read the academia literature. And probably all of them match what the oral tradition says at one time or another. Any city dweller, an artisan, the master craftsman, the master builder, and so forth. Some of those things that we've talked about. There's 4, 5, 6 definitions for Tolan or Tula, and at least 1 or 2 match the oral tradition. So then we go to the world of linguistics, and the Toltecs are said to be a part of a people called the Anahuac, and they all share a certain language, and we look at where the Anahuac and this language are distributed throughout North America, from somewhere in Canada all the way south to basically where modern-day Nicaragua is. And sure enough, we find evidence that this same language and the same philosophy of these people called the Anahuac is there. We see evidence of that through many different cultures who were united by philosophy, not so much genetics. That's another thing that academia doesn't like, is to be this concept that the Toltecs weren't a genetic race. You can find discussions about that. Well, then why doesn't we? They're arguing. But if you look at the artwork and the language and the philosophy, then you can trace it. And the long story short is, we haven't found anything in the academia record that is inconsistent with the oral tradition. They may have, like I say, 5 or 6 theories on time frames, places, activities, who did what, who was in charge, who conquered whom, and there's usually one of them that matches the oral tradition. And I haven't found anything in the oral tradition that the academics don't have at least one theory as a highly probable for. But they have no way of narrowing it down. They kind of throw up their hands and go, well, yeah. And my answer is, well, why don't you go ask the Toltecs? They're still here. So go ask me, go ask Coyote, go ask Cachorra, and they'll go, well, yeah, duh. At least that's probably what I would say. Question?
I saw part of a YouTube video this afternoon about the Olmecs, and this guy was postulating that the Olmecs predated and were he called them the builders of all these cities throughout Mesoamerica.
Yeah, there's a lot of
he also,
unknown about the Olmecs.
Yeah, and the fact that the heads, and I forget how many there are, like 17 of them, many of them have Negroid features, some even Asian features.
Yes.
And that it looks like the Africans were here, and that there may have been a global culture. Gee.
Yeah. So let me just say a couple words about the Olmecs and the Olmec heads in particular, and about the African influence and the Asian influence. It is theorized that the Olmecs in Mesoamerica were the oldest of the civilizations and cultures there. There is some evidence to suggest, and the date usually given is around 1200 or 1500 BC.
This was older than that.
And there is some evidence to suggest the Mayans were there as early as 2000 BC. And there's some evidence to suggest that maybe the Olmecs were there before that. And at that time, with the limited archaeological record that we have, and virtually no written record from that time, although we do have some artwork, that it's a little unclear how much separation there actually was between the Olmecs and the early Mayans. There is a great deal of evidence suggestive of sea travel between India and Mesoamerica, specifically influencing the Mayan culture. Statues in Mayan temples of Indian elephants, for example, and a whole lot of others. But the Olmecs were interesting. They appeared, if you can visualize the Gulf of Mexico and the way Mexico sweeps down and then back up to the Yucatan Peninsula and then back down to South America. Right there at the bottom of that curve, right there between Yucatan and mainland Mexico, is a place called La Venta. And that's where the Olmec culture seems to have appeared. And they spread outward in concentric circles for a certain distance and a certain time frame, and then they just kind of disappeared. So it's clear that whoever they were, they appeared there, at that site. That's just the African appearance that also has some Chinese-like appearance, is just some of the evidence about transoceanic travel in both ways, that what the academics have declared is impossible, which is transoceanic travel before Columbus. So if you support that idea and you see the evidence, then they basically say, oh, you're a diffusionist, and diffusion couldn't have happened by definition, therefore it didn't happen, therefore we don't believe anything you say. That's a very short, accurate description of what the academics say. So the Toltecs, it's unclear how much, if any, relationship they may have had with the Olmec culture. We know through the Phoenicians and other early transoceanic travel that there was a great deal of travel back and forth. We know that there's DNA, we know there's archaeological evidence that suggests the Chinese were here a lot. Toltec oral tradition says they were here a lot. I heard it through the oral tradition first, went looking, and my goodness gracious, look at all the Chinese travel back and forth for many, 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 many years. Chinese petroglyphs throughout the southwest in Mexico, even as far east as Georgia, exact Chinese characters. There's Chinese writing inscribed on the Olmec heads, which might have been there when they were first built, and it may have been added later by other Chinese visitors.
Graffiti.
Exactly. I was about to use the word graffiti and give the example that when Bonnie and I were in Scotland on the Orkney Islands, there's a huge, well, it's called Maze Howe. Is that it's not a broch, it's a...
Well, it's basically what they call a chambered cairn.
A chambered cairn. And it's huge. And that's another interesting place to study, because at the entrance tunnel to this chambered cairn, there's a stone that makes up one wall. It's one continuous stone, and it's one of those many you find in megalithic structures that's so heavy that modern construction equipment couldn't lift it and move it. And yet these guys are throwing these things together like we would Tinker Toys. And inside the Maze Howe chambered cairn, it dates to somewhere around the 5,000, 6,000 BC time frame. It's full of Viking graffiti and runes, and they've translated it, and some of it's like really crude, you know, like, ooh, Helga is wonderful and has large bosoms and things like that. Oh, she's just wonderful, and it's just a lot of that. And oh, you know, Lars, you know, missed the shot at the elk and we had to go hungry, you know, things like that. So
it's actually the place that cracked the runic script code, because it was basically, you know, the crude language of the people, and so it was easier to translate, and they were finally able to figure it out.
It's interesting. So yeah, graffiti is possible. They could have said, oh well, this is cool, this will be easy for the next group of travelers to find, we'll just write it on this. So we don't know. That somebody out there may know, but I haven't researched the Olmecs near enough. Question.
One of the things that was mentioned in this video was that on one of the heads, on the back of the head, there are 7 braids carved into the back of the head.
Interesting.
Braided hair, and that goes back to a particular region in Africa.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that everyone down in that area is Toltec, and there's just different pods of people, and they had relations with other cultures, and then it involved, you know, people like mixed with Chinese and African, and then that becomes a culture.
Maybe.
So maybe the Olmecs, blah blah blah, the whole list, Mayan, Aztec, it's just Toltec, and it's the historians that have it all wrong with the titles.
Well, historians don't have it all wrong, but they have a lot wrong.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, the Toltecs are not a genetic race. So anybody who undergoes certain training becomes a Toltec. Anybody who is able to tap into the higher planes of consciousness and pull through the knowledge, even if there were no Toltecs in a culture originally, can become a Toltec. You just have to tap into the divine sources of knowledge and information and begin following certain philosophies, which is what I want to talk about next, and begin working in a particular way with the attention and intent and in that very, very rigorous way of working and doing artwork and raising and improving our consciousness. Those are some of the hallmarks of being a Toltec. So the Toltecs claim to be part of this large group of families called the Anahuac. And the word Anahuac means the land between the waters. So, which waters? That's a question. Does it mean both Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and refer to the whole continent? We know that the Anahuac people were in fact spread out over a very large portion of North America at one time, all the way up to the Great Lakes region. The Toltec tradition affirms that. It could mean the area around the Great Lakes, which were bigger at one time. It could mean right up through the Great Basin of what is now Nevada and Utah and some of those central southwestern states, excuse me, which up until just 100 or 200 years ago still had huge lakes. And you know, an earthen dam breaks and half of Lake Bonneville drains out and flows away someplace. So we don't know that exactly. Or I should say, I don't know that little fact exactly. Which waters do we mean? So from somewhere up in Canada, all the way down through a large part of Central America to what is now Nicaragua. The word Nicaragua comes from the Anahuac language, aka the Nahuatl language, where Nikan Anahuac means the end of the Anahuac, meaning the end of the land between the waters. So given the range, I'm of the opinion that the Anahuac is referring to the whole continent of North America. So Nikan Anahuac morphed into Nicaragua. And that's what it means. So it's like, okay, we went that far, and that's where this land stops, and that's where that influence seems to have stopped. And of course, then they're butting up against almost South America. And there were certainly predecessors before the Incas, and then the Incans moved in and built their stuff on top of the megalithic structures that were there. And we're not going to go to South America today.
One of the other theories for the between the two seas is if they were actually remnants of Atlantis, and that they're referring way back to those ancient legends about.
Right. So there is evidence to suggest that the remnants of Atlantis. Nice segue. Thank you. When they dispersed in all directions, as you've heard me discuss from the writings of Donnelly. That they went in all directions, and that in North America, whether it was actually genetic merging and intermarriage, interbreeding, or whether it was just cultural transfer, that the language, the Nahuatl language, and the philosophy shared by all the Anahuac peoples actually came from Atlantis. I think you were maybe thinking of Aztlan and the Aztecs.
Well, I was just thinking of between the two waters.
Okay.
If you had an island in the middle of the...
In the Pacific.
the Atlantic.
The Atlantic. Okay. Different island it sang.
Yeah.
So anyway, this Anahuac, Toltec, Atlantean philosophy, this is the key point. So if you're going to call yourself a Toltec, you should understand this philosophy that we all are practicing and what we believe, and it has nothing to do with religion. Shamanism is not a religion. Toltec is not a religion, at least not in my opinion. It is a way of investigating the universe. It is a much, much earlier form of being scientific that didn't throw out the spiritual. So the Toltec philosophy, the Anahuac philosophy, is summarized under the name of Toltecayoto. And this philosophy was shared by the whole culture, from the earliest babes as soon as they could walk and talk, all the way up. The philosophy basically says the goal of our whole culture is what they describe as spiritual transcendence. Spiritual awakening, spiritual ascension, spiritual fill in the blank New Age adjective here. Liberation, enlightenment. Every act that they did, that we do, should have a spiritual intent that serves the spiritual transcendence of yourself and or preferably and the whole culture. It embodies the notion of uniting the spiritual with the material world. It further embodies the idea of combining the rational mind with the intuitive mind. That we have all of these as capabilities or possibilities or potentialities within us. This idea, material and spiritual, rational and intuitive, what do we see going on in the world around us today here? A great attempt to stamp out the spiritual and to stamp out the intuitive. Starting at the early ages from children. Oh, you can't possibly be seeing glowing lights on that plant. It's in the shade. You know, and on down the list, right? So those of you raising young kids, encourage them. Yeah, aren't those pretty colors? Even if you're not seeing the same colors. Because for kids, the veil is thinner than it is for us old fogies who haven't done the work and, you know, can't see it. The veil is thin. Train your kids from the earliest age to remember why they're here. So balancing that, and then is a big part of the Toltec philosophy. So it's everything is spiritual. The goal is spiritual upliftment or transcendence, balancing the spiritual and the material, balancing the rational and the intuitive. And there was a social pyramid where the base level of the pyramid, there's 4 layers. The base level is farming and food production. The next level up was health. And that was health from a very holistic point of view. So the study of herbs and herbal medicine, very important. Using nature for healing. Using the energy for healing. The next level up was education on every facet of society. They would never have told their children at any age, oh no, you're not allowed to learn that. Oh no, you're not allowed to ask questions. You would never have heard that in the Anahuac cultures that were using this Tolteca-Yotl philosophy. Kids starts asking questions at age 2. Great! Give them all the information they can. You know, they want to learn more language. Oh, great! Yeah, go see Aunt Mary. She teaches that language. She knows. She used to live there. She can teach that language to you. You know, there was none of this hold back. You know, when I'm in the 3rd grade, telling people I'm bored doing arithmetic, I want algebra and trigonometry, and then, oh no, you can't have that for 4 more years. Like, what do you mean I can't? So that was the education system I went through. And I managed to survive because I was a stubborn SOB. And I had this drive to get even. Don't you withhold knowledge from me. Mm-hmm. But not everybody has my level of being stubborn. Not everybody is descended from barbarians who don't take no for an answer. And then the top level of the social pyramid was the social order and organization, which included a legal system. And this philosophy, according to oral tradition, dates back at least to 5,500 or 6,000 BC. So this then is contemporary with the some of the oldest ruins that we see in Europe, which are situated in the places that tradition tells us survivors from Atlantis went. And there's many places where, like Maze Howe and Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands, and other places on the Isle of Malta, for example, where the stone structures involve megaliths, big stones that we can't move today, but they were kind of crude. You know, they'd find flat rocks and assemble them in different ways, but they weren't necessarily cut and shaped to exact angles the way Egypt was. Now, Egypt is reputed to have been a colony of Atlantis, and that it was actually started long before Atlantis fell. So that's why it was the best, and all the other pyramids in Egypt were crude by comparison. I'm not satisfied with any of the academic dates that are given for Teotihuacan, for the Giza pyramids. We're just now finding some of the big pyramids in Eastern Europe. There's one huge one in Bosnia, and I haven't seen any recent work. Have you?
No, they did a supposed debunking on it, but they haven't. It's so big they've never even got interior in it. Although, and see, part of the problem is that there's theories, but unless you have the backing of your university or whatever, you know, or the funding, or the permission of the local government to go digging around, you know, there's not much they can do. But I have seen footage of some of those kind of megalithic base walls. So even like recently they've said in Peru that, you know, the structures that are there, you know, the locals or locals at the time of the conquistadors said these are our walls, but what they're built on top of stuff that was there before. So those lower structures that you'll see on a lot of these ancient places are much older, and they have better precision, and you got the bigger megalithic blocks, and yet that's the oldest stuff.
Yeah, it's really noticeable in Peru and some of the other areas the Incas were, and the settlers asked, it's like, why are these huge stones on the bottom, and then all this other stuff on top is little tiny stones by comparison? They go, well, we built this stuff, but we didn't build these other big ones. They were here when we got here. We don't know who built it. So clearly, history is incomplete. And I would just love to see academia acknowledge that. You know what, gang? There's a whole lot of stuff we don't know the answer to. So let's be open-minded scientists like we pretend to be, and let's just start looking at all the theories and all the evidence and not throw out the 90% that doesn't fit in our little comfortable box over here. Because history is going to make everybody learn something new when all the truth is finally revealed. So with that kind of as the background of the Toltec philosophy, the key part of it is upgrading our consciousness. The Toltecs, those who were initiated into the Toltec lineage and did the Toltec work of being artisans and builders and so forth, they were always trying to upgrade consciousness to access a larger percentage of the universe. More data. You know, the analogy I like to use is, okay, we're looking around the room with our visual light receptors in our eyes, and we're missing the other 90% of the electromagnetic spectrum that goes out into ultraviolet and gamma rays and X-rays on one end, and then the infrared and the microwave and the radio on the other. And there's a huge amount of information there that our little detectors here don't detect. So by analogy, when you start looking at the energetic planes or energetic bodies and multiple octaves of that, we need to train our minds and our physical bodies to better link with our energy bodies. And to do that, that's the process of upgrading our consciousness, to become aware of the sensory data that is available to these other bodies, who have, in addition to, at the etheric and astral and mental levels, the next three up, let's say, there are analogs to vision, hearing, smelling, touching, right? Our physical senses. And there are other senses available that haven't manifested yet physically. We have energetic organs that have not yet created physical analogs. So human transformation is not done. We are not complete. In fact, some of the writings, which you can find, and you always have to take these New Age esoteric stuff with a grain of salt, just like everything I tell you. The difference is I encourage you to go out and double check me, unlike some websites. But by an average estimation, the universe is only 25 to 30% complete. Nowhere near done. Our evolution, nowhere near done. And our part of that, as Toltecs, is to facilitate that, to help humans transform into our next phase. With consciousness, with the energy. Our secret tool, our magic tool, is the Akadwa. We have abilities with the Akadwa now that we have more people holding this energy now than in the last 1,000 years. And what we have now is more advanced than it was 1,000 years ago. Every generation in these intervening years has been pushing the envelope a little bit. Coyote pushed the envelope a lot. in his core group of students, there's probably 10 or 12 of us who have pushed the envelope in different directions, trying to raise it. Some of you are going to take over and take what Coyote and I have taught you and transmitted to you, and you're going to push the envelope. And that is how human evolution is going to progress. Human consciousness is going to progress. And you are encouraged to take the Akadua and push the envelope. Where and how? It's up to you. Coyote, when I was down there in January visiting for some things, he was talking about how, you know, so-and-so, and he rattled off a list of 5, 6, 7, 8 of us, are all doing things with the Akadua that he never imagined or never envisioned. You know, all his core students, some of us have been there, you know, 8, 10, 15 years, something. People are doing it. That's what we're here for. So pushing the envelope, upgrading your consciousness, helping the transformation of humanity, using these other principles, the Totakuyoto philosophy, and using your upgraded consciousness and the Akadua to tap into your true will, your divine destiny, to find out what it is and how to do it, and then do it. That is a nice little summary of what it means to be Toltec. Questions?
Could you spell for me Toltecayoto?
Toltec, A-Y-O-T-L.
Got it, thank you.
And the A between Toltec and Yoto has a little squiggly above it.
And Enye?
No,
No?
not an Enye. And
Different squiggly.
yeah, it's, well, the studying I've been done on the the Nahuatl language, they use 3 different symbols for that emphasis on that peculiar sounding A. There is no standard of how it's written. You can put a little ditzy, sometimes it's just a long bar, sometimes it'll actually be written with a colon afterwards. So there's no standard for that, according to 3 different Nahuatl language learning websites that I have found and studied. Any other questions? Any questions online?
No, but I'm getting the message that the battery is running low.
What percent are we at?
Doesn't say.
Just hover over the battery symbol in the lower right and it'll tell you hopefully.
8 minutes.
8 minutes. So when it said I had an hour and 31 minutes, 40 minutes ago, they lied. Okay, so yeah, we're on battery power because somebody who shall rename nameless, me, forgot the battery cord or the power cord for the computer. So any other questions? Okay, thank you. For those of you watching at home, we're going to go offline now, so you have to hit both stop